The Ecuadorian Embassy, just behind Harrods, was the most surveilled spot on the planet. So we had to take extreme precautions. Julian and I would go into a corner and turn our faces away from all the cameras with scribbling little words on a piece of paper and just whispering each other ears. You have to maintain sanity, and you have to focus on not allowing it to destroy what is good in life.
When it comes to issues of surveillance, privacy, and transparency, few people have experienced them as deeply as the person sitting across from me today, Kristinn Hrafnsson. Kristinn is an award-winning Icelandic journalist.
WikiLeaks says the documents show the CIA's team of hackers have developed malware to be able to hack into almost any device people use.
Website WikiLeaks released nearly 400,000 classified military documents on the Iraq War.
Throughout his career, he's exposed war crimes, mass surveillance, and financial corruption, among many other important issues. His fight for transparency and freedom of information has been, to put it bluntly, extreme. Since joining WikiLeaks, quote, the giant library of the world's most persecuted documents, Kristinn has endured financial censorship, unprecedented state surveillance, and more recently, Julian Assange's detention, extradition battle, and even a reported assassination plot against him. Despite this, Julian Assange is now free, safe and well in recovery with his family in Australia. Kristinn, let's take things back to 2010. A banking blockade stripped away 95% of WikiLeaks revenues in a huge act of financial censorship. At the time you wrote, never before has an organization dedicated to the fight for justice and basic rights, transparency, freedom of information, freedom of the internet, and freedom of expression been hit with such a vicious attack. We've since witnessed a global move towards adopting intrusive central bank digital currencies, and now the government in the UK is legislating to spy on everyone's bank accounts under the guise of cracking down on welfare fraud. Could you tell us more about your experience with financial censorship and why you think that we should all be concerned by its rise?
Yeah, we should be deeply concerned. I think the banking blockade against WikiLeaks is a prime example of the extent that where corporate power can be used under the direction of political power to censor voices. And the banking blockade of 2010 against WikiLeaks, performed by all the major players in the world scene in finances, by Visa, MasterCard, Bank of America, PayPal, everybody were trying to blockade WikiLeaks and starve the organization of donations, which was our primary income. It was a donation from individuals. It was for the first time that these companies actually took these steps. They had tried to pretend that they were totally neutral and always pretended they were apolitical and in a neutral sense. The card companies said, we are just like a bill. There's no difference between a dollar bill and your credit card. You know, we don't take stands. And they used that as a pretext, actually, when they were trying to be stopped from allowing people to use credit cards and these plastic cards to purchase, disgusting material from the internet, from child pornography, what have you. You could donate to Ku Klux Klan. You could donate to various, courses that were allowed because they say we don't take a stand. So this was the first time that they took the mask off and abused their power. And we took them, we fought back and we won. It took years and years of battle and a hard battle, and it didn't get much attention at the time, and it was a tough battle. We were able to win in the end, to actually force them to reopen the processing of donations to WikiLeaks. It took 3 or 4 years, and then we sued them for compensation, and it took additional years. I think the entire process was about 10 years. But in the end, we came to a winning point, which was a first. But in the process, in the discovery process, we went to every jurisdiction. We found out so many things that were interesting about the abusive elements of these companies. We tried to launch an antitrust case in Brussels, pointing out the fact that these two American-based companies, Visa and MasterCard, had 95% of that card processing market in Europe and were coordinating in their attack against WikiLeaks. We were unsuccessful to get them to bring an antitrust case, but in the process we got confirmation and proof that the political powers in the United States, the heads of the intelligence committees, both in the Senate and the House, had been in direct contact with these companies and to force them to close their gateways to WikiLeaks, to close off the bloodstream to the organization. We also, of course, found out various other things that were spurious about how they were selling off data, claiming it was anonymized, but a lot of people would disagree that that was successful. So they are part of this cluster of big tech and certainly not value neutral in any sense. I often point out that in the WikiLeaks saga for the last 15 years, there are sort of two sort of clusters of revelations that are important. One are the actual leaks to WikiLeaks and what WikiLeaks exposed to, the war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Guantanamo Bay files, the shadowy world of U.S. diplomacy, etc., Vault 7, what have you. These are the direct journalistic endeavors that were extremely important. But the other side is the exposed through reaction to these revelations, the extremes that were taken in trying to silence and quash the organization and Julian Assange. That is revealing in itself. That's a story, that's a warning. It's unprecedented in so many ways. The banking blockade was one of these chapters in that saga. So yes, what can we learn from that? To be extremely careful. We live in a world now where these financial powers are trying to strip away the anonymity of financial transactions. They want to get rid of paper money. They want to have the entire thing digitized, which opens up for all kinds of abuses, and it's extremely worrisome. And of course, we saw how these powers would take the opportunity through the COVID crisis to take it a step further, to normalize the fact that no, let's take away paper money because that's sort of unsanitary and there's a danger to the health of the world and all that. One of many abuses of that situation, stripping away privacy and of serious concern. So we should be extremely vigilant in keeping checks on these financial powers because they are the part of that these forces who are directly attacking the sacred elements of privacy.
Coming to surveillance, multiple investigations have revealed the extreme surveillance that Julian Assange was under while he was holed up in the Ecuadorian Embassy in London. One source told Yahoo News that at one point, every human being in a 3-block radius was working for one of the intelligence services, whether they were street sweepers or police officers or security guards. You also described his time there as a Truman Show existence. Can you tell us more about this and the lasting impact this surveillance has had on him and your organization?
Yeah, I mean, it was known that this was the Ecuadorian Embassy just behind Harrods was the most surveilled spot on the planet. You know, the depiction of everybody working for the intelligence community, you know, spying on that embassy on the outside was known, and we saw that, we recognized that, we knew that, and we had to approach the embassy as a working place for 7 years with that in mind. We also, of course, then later found out that the surveillance was so intrusive and so overwhelming on the inside. And when I was talking about this Truman Show world, is when we learned that the company that had been hired to secure Julian inside the embassy turned against him and sold his services to intermediaries who were working on behalf of the CIA. So there was basically live feed from the embassy to the U.S., everything was under surveillance inside as well as outside. Nobody could enter embassy in the later stage without handing in their phone, which was open up. It was monitored. Cameras that were supposed to be without audio were switched to include audio without telling anybody. Hidden microphones were all over the place. So it was a horrible scenario to do work in. Of course, we enter into that world, many of us, with a little bit of prior experience and being on guard towards surveillance. But this was the extreme, and we had to take extreme precautions. And there were scenes where Julian and I would go into a corner and turn our faces away from all the cameras with our hands scribbling little words on a piece of paper and just whispering each other ear, to try to have a private conversation. Of course, that is so intrusive and damaging to an individual. The rest of us could walk outside. We could get out in nature and away from technology and away from everything like that. And but imagine Julian to be in that situation for 7 years. Of course, it takes a toll, and that is a thing that he's recovering from now. And nature is a big healer. And that's wonderful to see him in Australia a few weeks ago, healing from that situation. But yes, we know that that scenario. How do you deal with it? You deal with it simply by accepting it as a fact, and you take a mental measure of knowing the insecurity about anything, everything around you. But you have to maintain sanity, and you have to focus on not allowing it to destroy what is good in life. That is a very important thing, because otherwise you've lost a battle. And so these intrusive measures should not be allowed to take away the joys of life and etc. But I guess that for us, we got serious training in living under these conditions, and especially, of course, Julian, who was having to deal with that reality for years and years. In many ways, actually, it was a relief to get out of the embassy, in that sense, into the prison, because that was less surveilled. His existence was less surveilled under those situations, even though it was harsh and horrible. But yes, it brought you some lessons. But the most important lesson is that you are more aware about the options, the possibilities. You look at phones on the table, and you instantly understand these are listening tools, these are spy tools. You know there is the danger of an attack on your privacy all over the place, and mentally you just sort of adjust to it. But I want to emphasize that people should be vigilant, but at the same time maintain the desire for normality and focus on the good things in life that actually, makes you human and makes you enjoy life more, and because you have to maintain a connection to what you are fighting for, and it's a big fight.
You and I both had the chance to visit Julian in Belmarsh prison a number of times and know how difficult it was for him there. And I know that we shared concerns about his well-being in prison, but I think many people don't realize how difficult that period in the embassy had been. And in fact, the UN Special Rapporteur for Torture had considered that all of the conditions you've described contributed to Julian's psychological torture, in fact. I think it's also not widely known that there's an ongoing court case in Spain related to these surveillance aspects in the embassy. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
It's taken a long time, because the reason why it's in Spain is because the company that I was referring to was Spanish-based, and the personnel who were turned to basically CIA operatives under the contract were Spanish. I don't have an estimate when it will come to a conclusion, but hopefully it will be a lesson to take away from that. And through the discovery process, of course, you you get to know more details about how intrusive it was, and how horrible the violations were. It was truly a horrible situation in the embassy. Yeah.
WikiLeaks is now known, of course, for the Cablegate revelations, but you've done many other investigations. One is codenamed Vault 7. In 2017, your team at WikiLeaks released extensive documents revealing CIA capabilities of performing electronic surveillance and cyber warfare. This led the agency to redefine WikiLeaks as a non-state hostile intelligence service, which we also heard brought up in the extradition proceedings here in court in London. Can you tell us more about the situation?
Yeah, this was a definition that came from Mike Pompeo, who was the then CIA director in 2017 after Vault 7 publication. And to be honest, we still don't know whether this formal definition has been changed or whether WikiLeaks, a journalistic organization, multi-awarded all over the world, with highest honor for the journalistic work, whether our organization is still defined in this manner, which we have asked our lawyers in the United States to find out and clarify, because it's very important.
At Big Brother Watch, a comment we often receive is, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. What is your reply to people who say this?
Well, I like the approach that Edward Snowden took in a comment. I liked his comment on that topic, where he said, people who say, I don't care about privacy because I have nothing to hide, is like people who say, I don't care about freedom of speech because I have nothing to say. If you think about it in that context, you see how ridiculous it is to claim such things. You might have something to say in the future. These concerns, privacy, both in freedom of speech and privacy, are instrumental to our rights. We don't always see it as something that we need to rely on in our daily life, but people need to be aware of how important it is to the existence in our world. You never know when you need it, and unfortunately, we have many chapters in history where people don't realize the importance of the rights they had until they are stripped of those rights. So let's not go down that path and fight for privacy. We need that. We have always said in WikiLeaks that we are a transparency organization. We are pro-transparency, but that applies to the powerful. It's the transparency of the powerful who is needed, and increased privacy for the individuals who are in that context powerless or with less power. We are seeing the opposite actually happening, and that is a trend that has been going on for the last years and even decades. We see more opaqueness with those who have power, but less privacy of individuals. We need to turn that around. Those scales have to be switched. And that is one of the most important battlefront that we have in our days.
That's very relevant to an ongoing debate here in the UK, where we're about to see a battle in court related to the Home Office's reported order to Apple to breach encryption. It will be considered by the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, and we'll see after that. But would you comment maybe on how important end-to-end encryption is for both for journalists and for ordinary people alike?
It is extremely important for every individual, but especially journalists, who need to have ways and means to securely communicate with the resources, with the people who supply them information. And the news is always getting, tighter and tighter against the neck, not just for journalists, but for individuals. So we have to fight this in every battle that comes up, every battle. There is a tendency, and we see that the powers that be, it doesn't matter whether it is about political divisions, actually. And it shouldn't be a political issue per se, an a-party political issue to the fight for privacy. But there's always this tendency to bit by bit sort of eat away those rights. And the case you mentioned is one of these battlefronts now that we have in the big war. So I urge people to take a stand on that and fight this. This is a very serious matter.
As for WikiLeaks, what's next? Is your fight for freedom of information over now that Julian Assange has been released?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, this is an ongoing war. Sometimes you might see this as a case that is hard to win. It might be the case of trying to roll the rock up the hill. It will roll back. But it is a war. It's a fight that is ongoing, and it's getting more and more serious. And I think that people are starting to understand it, how severe the situation is, and are getting more and more on board, seeing how important this battle is. Definitely not a finished war. There is, in some ways, there is a pause now. We're giving Julian Assange time to recover, but he is doing well, and he is getting more and more involved in the going-ons in the world, and so he will emerge on the scene, so to speak. I hope very soon, with a very important addition to the voices in this war. And I want to emphasize, this is not about party politics. It should rise above it. And in so many ways, I think it's important that people join hands together across the board in that fight, because we're talking about absolute fundamentals in our existence, which are so important that, if we lose it, we are totally doomed. And let's not see that day for our sake and for the sake of our children and future generations, because it's hard to win this back and maybe impossible. We're talking about rights that were won in hard battles throughout time, but can be so easily lost in a day. So let's not make that. Let's join forces to stop that from happening. And WikiLeaks will hopefully play an increased role. This has always been one of our fronts, the fight for the freedom of information, freedom of the internet, and for privacy.
Thank you, Kristinn.